Next on Insights on PBS Hawai'i, housing or agriculture, which does Hawaii need more? Aloha and welcome to Insights. I'm Mahealani Richardson, your host for tonight's show. Redevelopment of Hawaii's former plantation lands is keeping alive the debate between needing housing and growing locally sourced food. On Oahu, the Honolulu City Council is considering a zone change for Ho'opili, a housing project nearly 20 years in the making. The project could displace some farmers who fear they'll lose prime ag land. Planners say there's room for both housing and farming. No matter where you sit on the debate, the question remains, can we develop more housing on what was once agricultural land and not lose food sustainability efforts? Housing or agriculture, which does Hawaii need more? If you're interested in contributing to our discussion on housing and agriculture, Insights on PBS Hawaii invites you to share your questions or comments with our panel. You can call 973-1000 if you live on Oahu or 1-800-283-4347 if you live on a neighbor island. You can also go to pbshawaii.org and send us an email or find us on Twitter at PBS Hawaii. Now on to our panel. Charles Rapun is a Waiahole farmer. For 40 years, he's been a co-owner of Waianu Farm, a 10-acre certified organic farm that specializes in taro, corn, and crops. George Atta has been the director of the city's Department of Planning and Permitting since 2013. Before joining the city, Mr. Atta was a principal, partner, and project manager at Group 70, an international design firm in Honolulu. Luciano Nerbi is a professor at the University of Hawaii Department of Urban and Regional Planning. Professor Minerbi has been critical in the past of the suburbanization of West Oahu and the effects it has on our people and island ecology. And Jesse Suki is a land use attorney who provides legal advice to public and private land use proponents. Previously, Mr. Suki was the director of the State Office of Planning, which provides the governor with direction on statewide planning. He also served as first deputy in the State Department of Land and Natural Resources. And thank you all for joining us tonight. Thank you. Thank you. Obviously, Ho'opili, a huge controversy right now, and it's not only about Ho'opili, but we just have to start with it right now because it's really hot right now. Mr. Atta, can you tell us the latest on this project for the Ewa Plain that calls for thousands of homes?
Well, we just went through the City Council, and this council passed the project on first reading, and that's usually pro forma anyway, but the real debate is going to start in committee next week, so it'll be and that will be for discussion, public hearing, and then recommendation for second reading if it passes out of committee.
And we've heard about the debate for so long, but where does the department stand on this particular project?
Well, the department submitted its recommendation, and it is for approval. And the primary reasons, as people always wonder, is that it is within the city's urban growth boundary, and it is conforms to the general plan's growth policy for the area. So we're recommending approval with conditions.
You know, jobs is always a consideration in this. Mr. Suki, where do you see in terms of this particular project? Will it create jobs? Will it push out the agricultural lands that people are saying that we still need to keep?
Well, for the project itself, I am aware that it will create construction jobs and also future jobs. It's a mixed-use type development with commercial as well as residential. But, you know, I think it's a false dichotomy to say that we have to choose housing over agriculture. I think we need both. And there's more than just housing and agriculture. We also need to think about energy, you know, recreational uses, transportation uses. We use our land for many different types of things. If I would talk about the statewide planning system and what George is talking about at the city, it takes place in that statewide planning context. You know, that's part of a long continuum that started, you know, maybe how long ago was the general plan first passed for that area?
Well, the first general plan is a 64 general plan, but the one that directed growth to Ewa is the 77 general plan.
Right, and so it's been in the plans to have this area urbanized, since at least that long. And so that you have the plan in place. The first stop for them for their first entitlement was the State Land Use Commission, and that's where the office I used to belong to, the State Office of Planning, was a party for the state. And our recommendation, like the Department of Planning and Permitting, was to approve the project with many conditions that addresses different criteria for moving a project forward. And the criteria is based on what the legislature has passed under Chapter 205, the state land use law, which addresses issues of environmental impacts, socioeconomic issues, housing issues. Agriculture is a big part of it, bringing in the 1978 amendment to the Constitution and made our agriculture a priority. So all of these things are taken into consideration, and it's a very difficult, long, complex process. I mean, it can take most projects, over 7 years to get to a building permit, and this project took much longer than that.
Mr. Rapun, when you hear about this project, people say, or the developers will say, that agricultural land will be preserved and created as a part of this particular project. Do you think that's true?
I think that ultimately all the land will be built on. That's been because the de facto policy of both state and county is to promote the construction industry, which is the same thing as saying promote the population growth. That's been our policy for a long, long time. Even though Objective A of the City Council of the city plan says that we're supposed to control population growth and balance in-migration with out-migration, but the truth of the matter is that construction drives everything, because construction is where the higher paying jobs are, and every family needs a construction worker. And I went to the first Ho'opili, the hearing in front of the Land Use Commission, and it was like every other hearing I've been to, with all of the, all of friends and all the local guys all with their t-shirts on supporting this project. And so I think we need to start reporting things differently. We always report, both nationally and locally, that new housing starts, are up, and that's always good news. And that's how we report construction too. And part of the way that we do population projections in this state of how many people are going to be here in the future is by looking at the construction industry and the tourism industry and seeing how much growth they need to be healthy. And then that's partly how we do population projections.
Professor Minerve, I wanted to hear from you, but there is this farm component as a part of this Ho'opili project. Do you think that's enough?
Well, I don't want to answer specifically now at this, maybe later on. I prefer to put in historical context while we arrived at this situation that, as you heard a minute ago, was approved at different levels, state and county level, for so many years, through so many steps, so that now why we even discuss the matter. However, as you mentioned, looks like that the community has not accepted yet this project necessarily at the loss of agricultural land. So we have to understand how we got to this situation. And I try to put the finger on the problem. And I think it is on the state population projection that are done by good researcher. However, population projection are made up of extrapolation of past trend, analysis of probability of event that can be international and affect the local situation, and also what is desirable, that should be set by the community and the legislature. What happened in these population projections that are very technical, very complicated, they use input-output model and so on, that very few people understand. They are given to the legislature, the government agencies, and so on. The state population projections are taken, I believe, critically, without being analyzed in detail by the legislature, in spite of the fact that in the introduction of this document, the state planner clearly say these projections are not necessarily a policy target. It's for the legislator and the administrator of state and county to make the decision on this. I don't think that this is happening adequately.
Mr. Atta, I mean, with these population projections, these are projections that are, 10, 20, 30 years down the line, and do planners need to change in the middle of everything if the public feels differently about a particular project?
Well, actually, the population projection for Oahu is done out of my office. We have Steve Young who does model. It is an input-output model, and they're best estimates. I mean, nobody knows the future, but if we look at the trends and how accurate these projections have been, I would say that the models have been fairly accurate over the last 20, 30 years. So while you can say that it's speculative in future, and planners have to look to the future, and we have to make educated guesses and projections about the future.
Can you take us through some maps? Because we actually have a map of Ho'opili and a more detailed map of the particular area. So why don't you take us through it and show us, I mean, we have a map that shows Ho'opili in the West Oahu area, and then there's another map that basically shows where the agricultural lands will be preserved, correct? So can you take us through that?
Well, can I interrupt for just a second?
Actually, just hang on just a second. Mr. Atta, take us through that first.
This map that you see before you really is the green areas are the areas outside of the city's urban growth boundary. They're the high-quality ag lands outside of the urban growth boundary.
So you see the green, that's the area that's supposed to be preserved, and then what are the red areas?
Well, the red areas are the higher density areas, and you'll notice that they're inside the circles that are on the map. The circles represent the quarter-mile and the half-mile radius of the transit stations for the new HART stations that will be there.
Now, if it wasn't for the community, though, would this green land would that have been in the original plans, though?
Well, the original plan actually had about 100 acres of ag land, even in the first series of plan. What has happened with over the discussion is that 100 acres has essentially doubled, so they're now preserving about 200 acres, so that had that impact.
Out of 1,500.
Mr. Rapun, go ahead. You want to jump in on something?
Yes, I just wanted to clarify that population projections are done based, at least in part, on what the construction industry and the tourist industry need as far as growth.
They're factored in.
They're factored in. So that, to me, says that ultimately this green land will be developed like everything else. In our Waiahole water case, the head of city planning was testifying, and he was saying how important development plans were, and how this was going to make sure that agriculture stayed there. And he was asked, well, how many developments have been turned down in Central Oahu? And he said, thought for a while, and he said, oh, one. And then ultimately, what happened to that development? Oh, ultimately it was approved. So that's been kind of the story. Every development ultimately gets approved because we need those kind of jobs.
Mr. Siki, go ahead. And you see things from a statewide perspective, and you have actually a map that shows the agricultural lands on every single island. So why don't you talk about that?
Before I get to that, I just wanted to comment on, it's an unfair characterization to say that all projects are passed. I was asked that question once when I was the State Land Use Commission, State Office of Planning Director by the Land Use Commission, and they said, how many projects do you not recommend approval of? And well, none, because the ones that make it through the process, the ones that get to our desk to review, those are the ones who got through the first ring of requirements. You don't get to up the point where you're being considered if your project doesn't make sense. And once you get there to the commission, the focus is not at the Land Use Commission to deny the project. It's how can the project move forward with mitigation to reduce, avoid, or mitigate the impacts that the project will cause. And that system is a system that is developed all across the country. The basis of our environmental and land use laws are just that humanity is going to have some impacts on the world we live in. How do we mitigate, minimize, or avoid those impacts? Unless we change that framework, that rubric, I mean, that's what it is.
And can you take us through your map here? And this is a statewide map that shows several green areas because, we were speaking earlier before the show. You were thinking that people tend to see things really localized where there is a statewide perspective.
Right, so what this map shows is that in the state of Hawaii, we basically have two layers of zoning. And zoning is, what's the ordinance and state law that tells you what you can do in a particular district. So at the state zoning level, we have four. It's agriculture, urban, conservation, and rural. About 95% of the state is in the state agriculture or conservation district.
And clearly those are those green areas that we're looking at.
The green and the white is the 95% of the state. And so the green is that ag, equally split between the two. So this is all the agricultural land in the state. Now, arguably, not all of this agricultural land is suitable for agriculture because when in the late 60s land was put into these classification categories, the agricultural district was a catch-all district, that put lands that didn't quite fit in conservation or wasn't urbanized. But there is a lot of agricultural land across the state, and I think to have a good policy about food security, how can we feed ourselves in the state, or make money as an industry off of agriculture, we need to think about agriculture in the context of the entire state.
Food security, can you talk about that, Professor? I mean,
I want to clarify a matter that require more attention. My understanding is that the state population projection has to be followed by everyone. So the county take the state population projection, and the only things they can do is to allocate that population in their jurisdiction. So I don't think it's correct that the city and county of Honolulu can establish a desirable population level. The state provide information, and the legislature should do that, but I don't think they do it adequately. And so I am afraid that in their very complicated state input-output model, they do exactly what is said. That, and also is not explained very well in the methodology, so they don't know. But I suspect that they go and ask to the landowner. This was many decades ago. They ask to the landowner, what do you want to do with this land? All sugar land, Central Oahu and Ewa. And
Mr. Atta, you're going to have to respond to that.
They say the housing.
Mr. Atta,
and
go ahead.
that projection go into the input-output model for the state of Hawaii.
Mr. Atta, go ahead.
Yeah, that's not correct in the sense that the model that we have looks at the land uses. So it's not. It doesn't ask the landowners what's your desire and factor that into the purchase. That's not in.
I'm talking about the old state population projection.
Mr. Rapun, let me bring the conversation to the talk of food. Hang on, Professor. Let me ask Mr. Rapun. Do we have enough farmland on Oahu and the neighbor islands to feed ourselves? Because that's the movement now. People want to stay local. They want to grow local.
Well, there's a lot of issues involved in trying to answer that question. It's not so easy to answer either. There's water issues and land availability issues and who's going to do the farming, and that makes it all quite complicated. And then if you're thinking globally again, if you look at the global picture and you look what's happening with climate change and things like that, are we going to be able to rely on food being produced in other places and coming here? Maybe, maybe not, depending on the climate. And what about here? What are our climate changes which are already happening here? How are they going to affect our food production? And I think it's important to look at a lot of these issues. Like, for example, the urbanization issue. The Central Valley in California, which produces about a quarter of the nation's food, fresh fruits and vegetables, it's being urbanized at the rate of 15,000 acres a year. Land in the United States is being urbanized at the rate of 2 football fields or 2 acres a minute since the 70s. So we're losing about 1 million acres a year of farmland. Of course, the United States has the best farmland with the best climate in the world, which is why we can brag about being the greatest nation on earth because of that. But that's the trend, that's what's going on, that's what's driving things. So we really need to re-look at agriculture, especially the kind of agriculture that we're doing.
I could get closer to you. The question, I mean, you asked if we had enough land. Just as a statistic, the local food, diversified food production and that's produced in Hawaii occurs on 15,000 acres, and they produce about 33% of the fresh produce that's sold. And of course, the majority still comes from the mainland. But it gives you a sense of scale and proportion. 15,000 acres is used to produce 33% of the fresh produce.
But it's also important to remember, even though that 1/3 of that 33% of the produce, if you look at what people are supposed to be eating, then that changes everything. Because we're not eating anywhere near the kind of diet we're supposed to be eating. So if you say, oh, we're producing 1/3 of the fruits and vegetables, if we're eating what we're supposed to be eating, then it goes down to 1/12.
Mr. Suki, you wanted to jump in. Go ahead.
I think the short answer to the question is we don't know. And it's because our state policies have not been set up in a way to answer the question, how much do we need to produce here to sustain ourselves? The way we've come at the problem is the question has been, how do we continue agriculture in the face of the end of large agriculture? No more sugar, no more pineapple. You know, our State Planning Act still talks about pineapple and sugar as a priority. It hasn't been updated in a generation. We did a study at the Office of Planning about what you would need to do to increase farming activity in Hawaii. And when we did that analysis, the one thing we didn't do is look at land, because it seems like we spend an inordinate amount of time in Hawaii dealing with the food issue, focusing on land, when you're missing the other two parts of Economic 101, which is land, labor, and capital. You know, we have a lot of land in the state for agriculture. Like I said, 95% of the state is in the Ag Conservation District, equally split between the two. Labor is expensive in Hawaii. What kind of policies are we going to set forth to deal with that? Capital, and when I say capital, I mean, you know, getting a tractor, financing, getting the water systems that are crumbling in the state to feed and provide cheap water to farmers who want to farm. How are we dealing with those issues? And those are the kind of issues that the strategy recommended and need to be implemented, really. I think, again, we spend too much time on the land use question.
Professor, do you think there's a way to deal with this? Does it have to be one or the other, ag or housing?
Exactly. I want to go to that point, and as you made it, we need, of course, both. And we lost so much open space and land for agriculture, trying to argue that we need that land for agriculture. We miss totally the other subject, that is, we do not need to plan human settlement and city with a continental sprawl type of density. The kind of development that you see here in the city and county of Honolulu, unfortunately, is low density, low rise, and immense suburbanization of a small ecological island in Central Oahu in Ewa, and then high density, high rise downtown in the residential area and in Kakako. These are the two very bad type of building typology and densities if you build too much of it. What we are missing here
hang on, Professor. We've got to get to some questions now because we're getting
high density, low rise.
Hang on, Professor. We've got a lot of questions that are coming in from a lot of our viewers, and I apologize for cutting you off, but we've got to get to some of these questions. And one of them is coming from Glenn in Kailua, and Glenn wants to know, is the Ho'opili development only for locals or outsiders? And so, you know, some people are thinking these homes might be too expensive. Can just local folks afford this, Mr. Ada?
The range of housing, at least the market price, obviously will be determined at the time the construction occurs. But the target that the Ho'opili project is mostly for, I would say, is mostly for local people. Obviously, anybody can buy them, but then they'll
What's
be
the
with
mid-range?
I can't say because I just know that it keeps fluctuating, but I know that their target has been more in the middle income groups. Yeah.
But the truth of the matter is, most jobs that people have, I think it's nationwide, it's something like 85% of jobs are less than $30 an hour. 62% of jobs are less than $20 an hour. And in order to afford the median income for a median price home on Oahu, I think is like $630,000. To afford something like that, you got to make $50,000. So that means if you're a farmer, farmers, they don't make any more than hotel workers make. They make like $25,000. That's one of the big obstacles when you're talking about labor and issues like that, is farming is basically one of the low-income jobs.
Professor, do you think people can afford to move into these developments?
Of course, no. It was mentioned on the newspaper recently that you don't meet the housing need of our local people building luxury housing. For every luxury housing that goes up, a piece of land is lost in the urban area for the local people.
This is not luxury housing.
Mr. Suki, talk about some of the agricultural lands that is truly available right now for the farmers. And obviously from the statewide perspective, we keep zoning in on Oahu, but there's all these other projects that are happening on the neighbor islands as well.
Well, one of the recommendations that we had in our food security strategy was continuing to invest in state-owned agricultural lands and county-owned agricultural lands. There's hundreds of acres of agricultural land available at reduced leases for people who are interested in farming. And part of getting some of that farmland actually available for farming requires investment in systems that convey water to the land. The legislature right now is talking about an idea, land swap with Castle and Cook, for example. That'll bring a lot more land back on the state side so that we can make it available for leases. And some of the conversation is interesting because people are skeptical. Maybe they give Castle and Cook a deal, but the concept is we are prioritizing as a policy that ag is a good thing. So maybe it's good that we invest in the land exchange to get more land that is available for farming.
One of the questions that we just received, someone says, directing growth to Ewa is based on population models. Are they out of date? Mr. Ada?
Again, it's not based on the model. It's based on the policy that was established. The policy that was established in the general plan in the 70s directed it to Ewa. So that's what's directing it. It's not the model that's directing it.
But I think we are missing...
Professor, go ahead.
I think we are missing totally a subject. We are asking, can we put housing on the best agricultural land of the state of Hawaii? The question is, why don't we put housing within the original urban district of 1970? The chief planner back then in the 70s, I think, said that there was enough zoned urban land without the need to redistricting agricultural land for urban use in Central Oahu in Ewa. I think he didn't last long on the job. But so the question is, can we build within Honolulu proper and Pearl City and Waipahu with urban infill? And we don't have the proper tool to do planning correctly with urban renewal and urban infill. We don't have the Japanese land adjustment system, Kukako Seiri, that exists in many countries. We have on the book a transfer of development right, but we don't really implement much. So We are missing the tools for the proper planning of the city with a good urban form. They provide densities that meet human scale, pedestrian orientation, livability, and make public transit in urban Honolulu feasible. We did everything wrong.
Well, we're talking about housing or food, so which does Hawaii need more? Please join us tonight by our conversation by calling, emailing, or tweeting your questions and comments. You can call 973-1000 if you live on Oahu, and 1-800-283-4847 if you're on a neighbor island. Mr. Suki, I know you wanted to jump in. Go ahead.
So I think the original question was about why development is happening out in Ewa. And George can maybe speak more to this, but that's part of a general plan. The State Planning Act is more than the Hawaii revised statutes with a list of things that people aspire to want to have in the future of Hawaii. It's a statewide planning system. And that statewide planning system requires that the counties base their zoning on general and community plans. And these general and community plans are the people's plans. I mean, they go through many public meetings, planning commission, neighborhood boards, finally adopted at the council, more planning meetings, where this urban core was set up and outlined, and urban growth boundaries. For several decades it's been that way, and it's out in Ewa. That's the second city. That was what people decided, and I wasn't here when all that happened, but that was the process and the plans that were laid in place. And I think the idea is if you follow the plan and you have density in that corridor, you preserve the North Shore and other areas of the island where you have less of the rural type development. George.
That history is very interesting. It's worth studying it and reiterated. When they came up with this development plan, after all the community participation, apparently the council people, together with the developer in the back room, changed the map and so on, so much so that a number of council people didn't get re-elected. And two of the development plan got sustained and other didn't get sustained. So that's why the history of urban development here is very important, because you can find all this pitfall. And so the urban growth boundary, I think is kind of ridiculous, because they suburbanized, they made urban, the county, all this land that was best agricultural land for suburbanization, not for planning cities.
I wanted to get to some more questions. Joanna from Hawaii Kai says, what does sustainability mean for development and farming? Do you think that sustainability goes with development and farming, Mr. Ripun?
Well, sustainability in farming is one question, and that has a lot to do with the kind of farming that goes on, and the kind of farming that's happened in the United States, at least since right after World War II, with basically the invention of nitrogen fertilizer, that totally changed farming, and it basically got people off the land and changed the whole treatment of the land. When Europeans first arrived in America, the average depth of topsoil in the United States was about 18 inches. Today it's around 6 inches or less. So we basically, that kind of agriculture, that nitrogen, and things were good up until that nitrogen fertilizer was invented. But after that, we switched from a manure, diversified crops, cover crops. We switched from that kind of agriculture to basically mono-agriculture. And so we've been mining our soil for quite a number of decades now, and that debt is coming due, is going to come due. So we need to change the kind of agriculture that we do. We need to go back to a different kind of agriculture. And part of going back to that kind of agriculture has to do with going back to a different kind of labor force. Right now, the people who are growing our food is like less than 2% of the population. And a lot of the labor force is migrant workers, and they work under horrible conditions, and that kind of farming is considered the most dangerous occupation in the world because of the pesticides and the herbicides and all those kinds of things. So if we go back to a different kind of farming, we're talking about a kind of land use that's much different from what we have now. And it's interesting that after the sugar companies kind of went out of business, if I'm looking at the labor issue here, when they went out of business, or going out of business, there was a report done by the state for these sugar companies. And the recommendation of this report was that if the sugar companies, or the landowners who were leasing to the sugar companies, when the sugar companies went out and the landowners now had their land again, the recommendation was that if they're going to lease this land out to farmers, don't let them live on that land, because what might happen is what happened in Waiahole Valley. When you want to evict them to urbanize your land, you won't be able to get them off.
You know, we've got some questions that have to deal with traffic, and obviously the traffic issue will come up. Someone says, do we need more housing? Do we need housing in areas without half-hour or hour-long commutes? Mr. Atta, in terms of the traffic issue, you know, obviously Kapolei was developed to deal with this. Do you think Kapolei is where it should be today, and how do you respond to this traffic question that continually comes up?
Well, I think it's related obviously to the level of density of development and the automobile lifestyle that we have, and so hopefully that normally with people comes congestion, and cars is just a symbol of congestion on the type of mode that we use for traveling. At the city, we're trying to shift to a multimodal system. Obviously, the rail is part of it, but it's to shift to multimodal and try to get off the reliance on the car. And how successful will depend on how well the multimodal system is designed. So, yes, congestion is going to be there, and especially when the idea is to densify an area. That means we're intentionally trying to get more people into the area. So you have to deal with this issue. But again, when you talk about traffic as cars, the car-centric lifestyle is part of what we're trying to get off of it. And one way to get off of it is to put jobs and houses close together, so you can live and work in the same place, and you don't have this suburban communities and you're commuting back and forth to work, because that obviously, so by creating communities that are more holistic, live, work, play kind of concept, I think you can reduce some of it.
Mr. Suki, do you think Kapolei has lived up to this promise of being truly the second city?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. Well, the first thing is it's a growing and developing city, so it's not there yet. But the plans and permits that are in place for these projects that are proposed and approved, they come with many conditions, a litany of conditions, and all of the projects, Ho'opili and the others in the area, have contributions that they need to make for improvements to roads in the area. So they will meet the impact that the projects are causing. Under the law, they're supposed to do that. They're going to do that. But what's more interesting to me is what George talked about is, our evolving community here. Soon I think we'll have the rail in place, hopefully. I'm a supporter of rail. I think that having transit-oriented development around these stations and keeping communities dense so that they can use the rail instead of driving provides people with the option of not getting into their car. The statistics that show if you use public transportation in Hawaii, you save about $14,000 a year. That's a big deal for a family who's making the median income. Transit can really change the way we live and the way that things are. We're worried about sprawl, bring things back in the urban core. So, that preserves the ag land.
Professor, I see you shaking your head. Why is that?
In 1977, I wrote a short article for the Honolulu architects about designing Honolulu for mass transit, because back in the 70s, the issues was we build mass transit or not. And I saw transportation policy going this way and land use policy going this way. I said we should put it together. So we should not create urban sprawl by changing the zoning from agriculture to urban. We should build a linear city, and the mass transit should start from Waikiki to the airport, University of Hawaii, and provide a public transit slow way, not fast, where you already have the density, people don't have to buy so many cars, and then expand the city in Pearl City, Waipahu, and so on. No need to go to Central Oahu and Ewa. And I believe that so much so that I was kindly asked to help plan the new town in Ewa. And I declined because I thought that it was in the wrong place.
Mr.
And
Ripon?
now I'm paying, as a taxpayer, the incredible cost of the suburbanization and the mass transit that may bankrupt the city and county of Honolulu.
Mr. Ripon?
The parallels between
Before your time. So
H3 and the rail, to me, are interesting because when H3 was originally dreamt up, the whole idea was to develop the windward side of the island. I mean, they wanted to make a deep draft harbor in Kahalu,
Right there.
and they wanted to make a nuclear power plant in Hawai'i. You know, that was the purpose of H3. But ultimately, the purpose of H3 was to generate, again, construction jobs. And that's what it came down to in the end is, you know, people fought against H3, they fought against it, they said we didn't need it. And what it came down to is they said, well, we need the jobs. And so Inouye ended up attaching a rider to the entire federal budget, exempting H3 from any environmental impact statement. And it was a done deal. And everybody was happy because jobs.
So you see what's happening is a real estate 101, leapfrogging, Mililani Town. All the land between Mililani Town and Honolulu is in the mind of everybody potentially urban, regardless of the zoning. So the zoning don't count anything because the land values appreciate anyway, then you get the zoning, the landowner become rich without doing nothing, and that's what we got. The suburbanization, I mean the rezoning to urban of all the Central Oahu and Ewa. We just have the mountains and the North Shore that is still in green.
I wanted to get into another, it's a question and sort of a comment at the same time from Michael, and he says, will growth ever be controlled when we have finite land and water in Hawaii? Mr. Suki, what do you think about that?
Well, I think the way we're growing is changing. Definitely, you know, I grew up on Maui, and a lot of the subdivisions there were sort of these classic 70s sprawled out communities. You know, in Oahu, we're building more dense. You know, in Kaka'ako, we're building denser. As land becomes constrained, I think we'll have to build denser. You know, and this issue again of population growth and carrying capacity, you know, it comes up a lot. And the fact of the matter is, you know, we can't control population growth unless we take on extreme policies that I don't think people have the stomach for. So we need to live better, we need to live more sustainably, we need to live within the limits of our resources, but we need to plan for future growth, we need to plan for the babies that are coming. You know, this whole Pili project, I'm not speaking for or against it, but it is meeting a need. In the entitlement, the decision and order, which is almost 200 pages, from the Land Use Commission. One of the studies showed that the need for housing by 2030 would be, 29,000 homes or something like that, and Ho'opili is providing about 11,000. So housing's needed. And we're not just talking about births or in-migration, we're talking about people who are currently 3 families to a house right now. That's what we're talking about.
Mike of Hawaii Kai, and I'll just direct this question to Mr. Ada. Are these developers required to contribute to the cost of rail?
Not directly, like anybody else. They you know, like anybody else, since the rail has the 0.5% tax, that they will contribute like anybody else with the GET. But they're not contributing to the heart or the station designs, because those things are all within the current business plan. And it doesn't. The current business plan does not ask the landowners yet to contribute.
I mean, there hasn't been any, let's say, public polling on this, and I'm reading question after question after question, and a lot of these statements here seem to be anti-development. But what do you think is really the general the general feeling out there? Is it hard to tell? Because obviously opponents will be a lot more vocal than, let's say, people who are proponents of a project. Mr. Atta.
Yeah, I think, well, and I guess the question is actually a lot more nuanced than that. Are they for development or against development? Some people will look at Hawai'i and have a specific opinion about that. I think that there is a kind of fatigue about that's coming with a lot of the construction that's going on, especially and I think it's comprehensive. You know, you see the boom in buildings in Kaka'ako and Waikiki. That causes a kind of this is getting a bit much, and so there's that kind of general feeling maybe we're growing too fast, too much too fast, and I think there's a little bit of that fatigue, but at the same time there's also I think the other thing of that fatigue is the traffic congestion all along the corridor, everything from Waianae to East Honolulu. So those things I think make people a little tired of development. At the same time, you know, the need is obviously also there, whether you call it construction jobs or, you know, people you know, doubling up, tripling up, and, you know, being cramped in housing. That need is also there.
So, Mr. Rapun, what to do if there is this fatigue, but the housing demand remains very, very strong?
Well, maybe the only kind of housing we should be building is for people who really need it. And maybe we need to be much more creative in the design and the density and low-rise, like he was talking about, low-rise density.
I said high-density, low-rise.
High-density, yeah. There was a student at the University of Hawaii, an agricultural student, and he did a redesign of part of Honolulu. And he is a suburban area. He redesigned it. He increased, I think he doubled the density and doubled the amount of open space. And so there's a lot of creativity that can happen out there. Maybe we need construction jobs that have to do with redesigning communities or rebuilding communities, or tax breaks for people who participate in redesign and rebuilding. I'd be interested to know how many local people actually end up at Ho'opili. You know, how many people are really going to be able to live there and afford living there? And it's interesting that in the late 90s, that was the first and pretty much the only time since statehood that Hawaii's population growth rate almost was at zero. And that was when Linda Lingle got elected, and Maui was still booming, but Honolulu was really, you know, the population growth was almost zero. And people were going, what are we gonna do? What are we gonna do? Because, you know, the jobs weren't there, so there was a very large migration of construction workers to places like Vegas or places like that, and that's what's happening around the country, is you have this movement of workers to those places where the population is growing really fast. So Las Vegas was like 50,000 people a year were moving there. And so these workers were moving there basically to build houses for workers who were moving there. So that's the trend nationwide.
And you know, Alan from Kailua brings up something really interesting. He says the real elephant in the room is how many limits can we put on population growth? We keep building because there's no limiting the population. Your thoughts, Mr. Suki, on that?
Well, that's sort of what I was talking about when I talked about carrying capacity studies. And, you know, it's good to understand what kind of growth in population we can expect so that we can plan for it. But you know, it's difficult to put a cap on it. A lot of the zero growth that was talked about was because the economy was bad, and you know, people were moving out for jobs, and those construction workers are actually people in my family, and you know, they've been here for generations. I hope that they don't have to move. Maybe, you know, focus should be on reskilling people or something, but you know, just not shutting down construction. And you know, I don't agree with the argument that things are built in Hawaii just because of construction jobs. You know, there's a need for some of these things, a market that needs to be met.
Like what we see in Kaka'ako, of course.
If policy wants it such that we incentivize the market to produce other things, like for example, there's a gap in affordable housing that needs to be met in the state of Hawaii. If we want to incentivize the market, because it's private developers who build it, if you want to incentivize them to build it, government is going to have to invest in that, like they do in every other municipality in the country that invests public treasure in developing affordable housing.
It's interesting. Instead, they are investing in mega building for millionaire in Kakako that only very sophisticated construction company can do, and the zoning, the state, not the county, provide incentive to build a very big building if the parcel is large. Should be the reverse.
Well, you know,
if the parcel is small, they should be able to build more in terms of the number of
you have to recognize though the Kaka'ako that they have a reserve housing policy which requires the developers to set aside a certain percentage of the project for affordable. And in order to pay for the affordable, you need to subsidize it either by government or the private developer needs to subsidize it with higher-end projects.
Has been very poorly implemented on Oahu, because then the developer don't build it. They say that is the market change. That's what happened in Central Oahu.
Mr. Ada, go ahead. I see you shaking your head.
Because Halakawila Place is in Kaka'ako. It's affordable rentals. 801 South Street is reserve housing, and he's building 2 towers. And we look at the profile of those people who bought it, 95% local. And
well, what about I mean, this is, we're sort of moving into the issue of Kaka'ako, but because you bring that up, I mean, there are a lot of units there that are massively expensive.
It is, and there's no question about it. And the thing to remember about housing in Hawaii is that we're in a global market. This is not a purely local market, and that's an unfortunate thing, because the kind of pressures and demand comes from a global network, and so yes, clearly it raises prices up. We have a tremendous demand and I think Honolulu is one of the 3 hottest markets in the country right now, and that will raise prices up. Whenever you have high demand, it will raise the price.
Mr. Ripun?
I think we have to go back to the beginning, kind of, think globally and act locally. I think we need to look at what would our economy, what would life look like here in the islands if we did have a stable population? What would people do? What kind of work would they do? How would they live? And we need to think globally. If we're looking at climate change stuff, most of climate change, most of the problem is caused by the wealthiest nations, especially the United States. So, and that's not a population issue. That's the kind of lifestyle we have, the ways that we're accustomed to living. And I think that we need to couch all these questions or frame all these questions in a very different way. We need to relook at things, especially when it comes to climate change. We need to totally relook at our economy and how it works and what we're doing to the world by the kind of economy. There was a experiment I just wanted to mention. I think it was in Utah or Idaho, I'm not sure which state, but they had a fiscal crisis. This was a number of years ago. And so all the state workers went on a 4-day work week. And it was really interesting. It turns out the workers really liked it. They called it Father's Day because all these parents, especially fathers, were spending way more time with their kids. But the most interesting thing was their fossil fuel consumption dropped by 15%.
Just a final question or a final thought. And someone said, as an island state, how do we balance our housing needs versus our food and ag needs? Is it possible to have a balance, Mr. Ada?
No, definitely can. I mean, I think it's more in. Well, there's two caveats. I mean, this discussion about global is true. While we're an island, we're influenced by global forces, both economically as well as other things, migration and population. So food and housing is that we talk about supplying both. It's really it's a global context, and so we don't even the city and not even the state has full control of pricing or population growth, because as Jesse said in the beginning, we don't have the tools to control. I mean, but by U.S. Constitution, we can't control, the interstate commerce or movement. We don't. We just can't. And then the global economics, the price of things, if you're in a global market, you can't control it. I mean, you have only a certain amount of control. But what we can control is, what we allow. And I don't think it's a question of lack of resources. I think the land is there. I think some of our regulations increase the cost of things, and we can definitely improve on that area.
Mr. Rapun, do you think, can we have a balance? Can we achieve balance?
We have to change the way our economy works. We have to do that. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to deal. We're not even going to have an island to live on. If we have to, with climate change, things like that. I mean, that's a huge issue. We have to deal with that, and that might, a lot of kaka'ako, you might be able to get to your apartment by boat. That's the only way you're going to be able to do it. So I think we need to rethink a lot of things, go back to the drawing board, and we can't just keep reporting that new housing starts are up and that's good news.
Mr. Suki, can there a balance be achieved between ag and food needs and this need for housing?
I think, as I said from the beginning, I think it's a false dichotomy. There's a lot of things we need to think about when we're thinking about how we use land in the state. But I think when it comes to agriculture, the issue is not primarily land. Some alarmists are saying we're at a tipping point on Oahu. But I think that what we can do rationally is invest in things that enable people to farm. Things to do with labor, things to do with capital improvements, invest in state agricultural parks that keep leases low, invest in the water systems that the state has that are crumbling post-agricultural era. There are things we can do to enable people to farm and more people to farm. And I think when we do that, we'll get more food produced locally and for sale nationally.
Well, I'd have to wrap this up. Our time tonight has come to an end, but I wanted to thank each and every one of you for spending this time with us. It's been a very lively conversation tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, next time on Insights, the first 90 days of Governor David Ige. While on the campaign trail, our new governor made some bold promises that he would work to build consensus, reform public education, modernize our tax collection system, and support our kupuna. Going forward, what can we expect from our newly elected governor? That's next time on Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Mahealani Richardson. Ahui ho.